Hi, everyone. This is Dee Marley with the History Bards podcast, and we are welcoming James T. Hogg, the author of the Girl with a Knife series of historical books. James is a prominent New York City real estate attorney with 2 published nonfiction books about real estate and business, one of which was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Girl with a Knife is his first fiction novel, writing as James T. Hogg. The novel is based on a story he told many times to his now grown children. He relates that his goal, then and now, was to create a story that the reader simply cannot put down, even when it is midnight and the reader has to get up to go to work the next morning. I like those kind of books. Hogg was inspired by Ken Follett's writings and finds his natural writing style very similar to Mr. Follett's. This includes an intricate plot and unforgettable characters that interweave throughout the story, culminating in an exciting denouement. Readers who enjoy Follett's masterpiece, Pillars of the Earth, will undoubtedly enjoy Girl with a Knife. Hogg now lives in New Jersey and has been happily married for 38 years to his soulmate wife. They are blessed to be the proud parents of 2 grown-up daughters. The author's muse calls him from his summer home getaway where he goes to play very loud music and write and write and write. Thank you so much for being on the show today, James, and how are you today?
First of all, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. And
Sure.
actually, I'm in my summer home right now, so life is
Yay.
as good as it could possibly get. Thank
Oh,
you.
that's great. That's great. Well, to get things started, me and our listeners, we would all love to know more about your series. Can you tell us more about it?
Sure, of course, you're right. It is a story I told my kids, and I'll tell you sort of the backstory, which is very weird. I
Okay.
don't know if it makes me look so good, but I'll be honest about it. So a long time ago, it's about 20 years ago. I was in the kitchen and I was with my wife. And I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing when I say that sometimes we men can act like jerks, okay? And I was being, all right, there's no question about it. Jerk was me. And I don't know, I read a book. It was a bestseller. And I thought it wasn't good. Okay. I don't remember the book. It was 20 years ago. So there I am sitting at the kitchen table and I'm ranting, like a guy, and I'm saying, I can't believe how bad this book is. And it was a bestseller. I'm going on and on. My wife, wonderful wife that I have, still married, as you noted, she rolls her eyes and then she says, well, I suppose you could write a bestseller. And I don't know why, but when she said that, it was weird. It wasn't like I planned what I was going to say. The story just burst out of me. I said, okay, watch. And I started telling this story. And I'll be honest, I still tingle when I remember. I'm tingling right now. It just kind of came out of me. And it didn't, like I didn't plan it. And the, sort of the beginning of the story, that a spoiler alert is, there's a girl, a teenage girl is the protagonist. And, she's everything's wonderful. A mommy and a daddy and a lovely little sister, and they live in a community in colonial times, and life is hard, and they're poor but they love each other, and everything's wonderful. And then in the first part, some absolutely horrible things happen, which I described as I said to my wife at the kitchen table.
Right.
Horrible things happen, and then at the end of the beginning part, she escapes, galloping away into the darkness, vowing her revenge. And that was sort of the gravamen, or how the whole thing started out. And at that point, I hadn't really figured out the rest of the story. And the second half came, I used to go on these long runs with my daughter. We just run along and run along. And after a while, the run sometimes got to be 2 hours long, believe it or not. And we would just run along and just trot along, mom, dad and daughter. It was very nice bonding. After a while, we'd get bored, so I would tell stories. And so this story, the finishing of it, which then I really had to think through and figure out, how does she get her revenge? What happens? And, I would start telling the story, or, continuing the story with my daughter. And she helped, because sometimes we come to like a weird spot in the plot where it didn't work. And, but anyway, after, a few months of running along the thing done, anyway, that was all 20 years ago. And I've been planning to write it ever since. And a few
Right.
years ago, I said, hey, it's time. And I carved out part of my life to do it.
Oh, that sounds great. Isn't it odd how that happens? How inspiration comes like that and you don't expect it?
It was, yes, it was very, very, strange and surreal in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us who inspired Faith Emily Wentworth, the protagonist in the book.
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I don't know. I'll make a guess though. When I was telling stories, just I made up a lot of stories. I'm good at making up stories, and most of the stories I made up were for my daughters, who were,
Right.
I mean, I started making them up when they were like 5 or 6, and this is true. You already know, but I explained to them how when girls turn roughly 11 years old, their baby ears fall off, and they're growing up come in. I mean, obviously everyone knows that.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I made up this story for them when they were little, and then as they got older, I kept on, kind of raising the age of the protagonist
Right.
to be a few years older than them, just sort of, kind of like, if you're a girl or probably a boy too, you're a certain age growing up, you want to read about or hear about kids who are a little older.
Yeah.
So my guess is, although it really isn't either of my daughters, my guess is Faith, who's the protagonist in the book, was probably not inspired by, but somehow relevant to telling the story to, I guess, a tween girl at that time.
Okay. So you would like categorize this more for young teens or for like adults as well?
No, it's kind of weird, but older women seem to love the book.
Oh,
Um,
that's good.
my wife's mother in her 90s, who just passed away, she loved the book. Took her months to read it, and she read it every single day. My best friend's mother, also in her 90s, but almost had a fight with her husband, the guy, though, as to who, fighting over the books. They only had one copy, but for
Oh,
some reason, especially older women, I don't know why, love the book. It probably, I guess it may appeal to women due to the protagonist being a woman. Although a lot of us men like reading that stuff too. And one of the sort of themes that resonated was when I was researching colonial times. One of the things that was saying is women, especially young women, were to be seen but not heard.
right.
And I thought that was, incredibly offensive. And so, this protagonist is literally having none of that, and she's like the absolute epitome of the opposite of that. And
Oh,
maybe that's why, look, you're a woman. I don't know why, but
yeah. That
people love.
resonates really well.
I mean, who the hell would want that? That's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a man, did you find it difficult writing as from a female point of view?
Well, it's not necessarily all from it's a really great question. I don't really, it's a really good question. I don't think so, because there's different characters in the book. There's
Hmm.
obviously Faith. There's a little sister. There's the dad, who I always identify with the dad.
Right.
There's the mom. Then there's the bad people, the Downings. Martha and her husband, and the evil sons who caused the whole tragedy at the
Right.
beginning. Eventually, there's a swashbuckling guy with a sword. So there's all different parties in there. So I didn't really necessarily feel I was writing from the point of view of a woman. At least, it's a great question. By the way, nobody's asked me that, so I'm thinking about it. It was just one of the points of view of the characters, and what happened along the way. And I don't know how this happened, but the characters really started to be alive. Like I knew them,
Yeah.
and writing the book, which I guess altogether is like almost 1,000 pages if you add up all the volumes. The part that the dialogue was weird. It was like it took no time. It was almost like they were just talking, and I was just
Yeah.
dictating what they were saying, because I felt like I knew them after a while.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you really do. That's as historical fiction authors, that's what happens with us. It's like the characters seem to take over.
yeah, I there was one part, without, I don't want to give things away, but there's one of my characters dies, and I was crying when I was
Oh
writing.
yeah.
I was so upset.
Yeah.
And I was like depressed for like a couple of days after that. And it was obviously, he had to die, but it was just so horrible. It really hurt. I was like a
Yeah.
person that I love dying.
Yeah. That well, I guess that's a good sign. If it's making you sob, it should make the readers sob as well. Well, let me ask you this. Since this is historical fiction, we'd love to know more about the research that you did and how that kind of how you entwined that into the story.
So it's a great question with a somewhat embarrassing answer. So,
Okay.
okay, so I wrote, as I said, I made up the story. And then I, figured like, oh, I'll just type it up. I start typing it. And then I started doing some research and it made no sense. It did not even remotely fit into history at
Yeah.
all. Oh boy. So then all right, stop writing, start researching. So I started reading everything I could. I read The Crucible. I read like anything I could find about colonial times. And then I was able to actually write story and it made sense. And it was, I think, a pretty decent job at historical fiction, but it wasn't great. And then I got just lucky. Sometimes you get lucky in life, and sometimes you don't. An editor that I found on Reedsy, her name was Cindy Marsh,
Mhm.
who is both an English teacher and her specialty was colonial America. And so
Great.
she added so much and she put it like so many things in and corrected so many things that I was close but not quite right on. So that at this point, I'm very confident that it really is, solidly good, like, or accurate as much as is possible, historical fiction. But I take my hat, which I'm not wearing, off to her. Without her assistance, it would not really be remotely as good. And then the other last thing I'll say on that point is there's a couple of places where I just realized historical fiction's accuracy and the story were just not going to work. And
Mhm.
there's only really one place like that. And I just said, you know what, I'm rather tell a great story than be perfectly accurate.
Right.
So just that one little blot, but I don't know what I can do about it.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's very true that if you're telling a great story, that those little things don't really matter.
I don't think it's not really that big a deal.
Yeah.
And I can even tell you what it is if you want, but it's up to you.
Well, we'd love to know more about, like, did you have a favorite character that you wrote about, or is there a favorite passage from your book that you'd love to share with us?
So my favorite character is a fellow named Mertens, uh, Warner Mertens. He doesn't actually appear till book 3 or 4, but he's an older man. He's about in his 60s, just like me. And I don't know if he's my super ego, alter ego, or whatever you want to be. So Mertens was kind of like a kind of a swashbuckler. Colonial times there were all these wars, people fighting with the Brits,
Right.
the French, and this thing, and so he would be warring and whoring and just doing all sorts of things. And he was a bad guy, but an amazing fighter that never lost the battle. And I don't think this is a spoiler. He is smitten, falls in love with a minister, a man, based on a sermon. Not sexual love, just like worshiping love, because the
Right.
minister sort of uplifts him to say, your life, as he's giving the sermon, your life is horrible. It's a disaster. It's ruin. You'll burn in hell because you've done only horrible things. And so Mertens just it's like an epiphany hits him, and he wants to be different. And so he becomes like the hero or one of the heroes of the story. And he's like a really cool guy. And, he goes to the minister and begs to, live in the church and serve the minister and God and everything. So anyway, if there's anyone who's my favorite character, it's him. Although, wait, I'm sorry if I'm babbling. There's another favorite character who just popped up kind of out of nowhere almost after I'd read the book. And it's a woman. Her name is Nunyi. And Nununyi is an American Indian. And as she's described, she is like so good with the bow and the arrow that it isn't that she's good with it. It sort of is her. Her bow and her arrow become part of her. And so her story is kind of percolated into the main plot. And then her role, it starts out completely tangential, and you see little bits of Nanunyi. And then as the story winds on, her role gets bigger and bigger, which is part of the plots kind of coming together. And
Mhm.
she just becomes cooler and cooler as the story goes on because of her prowess with the bow and arrow. So those are my two favorites. I know you asked for one.
Okay. Oh, that's great. No, I love that because that'll give the readers and those who are listening an idea of what to expect see if they have the same kind of thoughts about being their favorite characters as well. Well, I saw that you like in the intro we mentioned that one of your favorite authors is Ken Follett. So tell us how he inspired you to write in this genre.
Well, look, I want to be really clear. I'm not as good a writer as Ken Follett. Okay. I don't want to pretend that. All right. I mean, this is my first book. Um, I guess the reason I like his writing is I mean, The Pillars of the Earth is, as
Yeah,
maybe a lot of people share, is, one of my favorite books I've ever read.
mine
But
too.
if you recall, I don't know how recent you read it, it starts out with this beautiful scene where there's a
Yeah.
young man who's going to be hung, and
Mhm.
he's innocent, and there's three people, like a priest and somebody else, who are behind him.
Yeah.
They're evil. You know that,
Yeah.
because it's just obvious. There's a crowd gathering, and he's this innocent young boy. He's being hung wrongfully, and then the crowd parts. This woman rushes through, and she curses them, and she cuts the head off a cock, a fowl, or a chicken,
Right.
and sprays them with blood, and then says, "You're accursed," and then she runs away. That's how it begins.
Yeah.
It's something like 980 pages.
Right.
You know what the hell happened. But after that, you gotta know.
Yeah.
And then the story starts. And I just found that so, like, such a great way to start things. And then the way he writes is, he has a very simple style, like,
Mhm.
which I'm not saying I emulate it, but I just find myself comfortable in. He tells the story. He doesn't embellish a lot of detail around things, but you
Yeah.
get the detail from the characters, which are wonderful, and then the plot, which is super intricate. And so, I just think he's just such a master
Yeah.
that I find him, somebody that, is my hero, if you will.
Yeah. And we all have ones like that that we really admire, that we like to emulate. I have ones as well. So that's really, and also to fans who may like can follow it. It's good to know that that you have a similar writing style. So that's good to know for the fans out there that are listening. So,
I
you go ahead.
No, I say I hope.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. As always, as all of us authors do. Well, let me ask you this: I know that book 5, right, is the end of the Girl of the Knife series, or so? What do you have planning coming up?
Uh, at the moment, I've got got a weird book that I'm, just percolating with the plot, and it's too messy to talk about. I also, I also could see a sequel to Girl with a Knife,
Okay.
um, and I've been, percolating on that. But I think if I tried to tell you possible sequels, I would spoil the story.
Oh, no, that's fine.
But I think the Girl with a Knife, could be, there could be a sequel to it that
Okay.
I think would be a lot of fun to write, and, for you to read as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you're at your summer writing retreat home. Is this the only time that you get to write?
I find that, like, look, every writer, I'm guessing, does things differently. I have a day job. I'm still actually
Yeah.
employed. So I go out every day. I go to work, and I talk to clients, and I do all that stuff.
Right.
And so, I also commute, where I live in New Jersey, New York City. So I get up at 5 a.m. to beat the traffic. I get home at night. I'm tired. And
Yeah.
then the weekend comes, and, the last thing I want to do is start to write. And the reason I think it is, this is just going to my own, like, brain. I think there's sort of thing called, like, emotional energy that you need to write a book or do your,
Yes.
and I just find that I run out of it, like at the end of a week or during the week. I just don't have emotional energy. So when I come down to Cape May, my house down here, I try as best I can to turn off work. Not really a great at it, but I try to. And then after a day of just relaxing, I get all excited about doing something.
Yeah.
So that's why I have found that if I'm going to write a book, the thing that works for me is go away from work, go down to Cape May, spend a day lying around, and then, as you already mentioned, blast music like super loud, and just start, writing the book. And that's the thing that works for me, at least.
I think that's a great thing. It kind of reminds me of one of my favorite authors is Virginia Woolf.
Mm-hmm.
And when she wrote A Room of Your Own, because, you do have to kind of have that space, as a artist, as a creator, writer, whatever you're doing, whatever a venue you're using as an artist, you kind of have to have that little space of your own so that you can kind of, like you said, re-energize.
Mhm.
So I think that's great. And I recommend so many people about going on writers retreats or things like that to re-energize your writing. It's so valuable. So I'm glad you have that. I'm glad you have a room of your own.
Yes, I do. I'm in it right now.
Great. Well, so do you have a favorite passage from your book that you'd like to share?
Well, it's not a passage.
Okay.
Let me see if I could do this. I don't want to screw things up. I guess this is so minor. It does. I don't know. You know what? You said you can edit things out. So you can
Sure,
just
I can.
just pop out. So in the book, there's a young. It's not a passage, but it's like a vignette. It's like a paragraph. There's a young boy. His name is Luke, and he lives in the church. And he's like he's raised by the minister and that sort of thing. So his parents were killed, and he's a sweet boy. And when Mertens, who I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
comes to the church to live there, he latches onto him, and he sort of becomes almost like an adopted son, if you will.
Mhm.
And so, and Luke while Mertens is fearless, Luke is afraid of everything, and he confesses, to Mertens, I'm afraid of everything. And Mertens, points out, and this is not a quote for me, it's just the famous quote, courage is not the absence of fear; it's having fear, but still doing what you need to do anyway. That's courage. Anyway, they take walks in the woods, and they're walking in the woods, and Luke is, screwing up his courage. He finally is able to tell Mertens his deepest, darkest secret, which is that he's gay. Now, in colonial times, it's enough trouble today, we all know, but in colonial times, it was just absolutely horrible. You
Right.
couldn't be gay without awful things happening to you. So he's crying and sobbing and telling Mertens the story. And so then Mertens relates a tale, and he says, Luke, I had a best friend, I forget his name, call him Toby or something. And, Toby and I were in battles together, all over. And then there was one day it looked like we were going to be killed the next day. And, Toby came to my tent and, revealed that he was gay and wanted to, have relations with me. And, I turned Toby down very contemptuously. And I've always regretted that because even though I didn't, wanted to do that, I feel awful that I treated my best friend so poorly. And so then he says, Luke, you were given this, gayness by God to test you because you're a strong person. Anyway, Luke is now crying, and they're embracing. And then Mertens, tells the reader that he totally made up the story.
Oh, oh, you made it up.
Sometimes it's just the right thing to do. And so it's just a very, very sweet scene because, Luke is just so, loves his sort of adopted father so much, and
Mhm.
his father's trying to so hard to uplift him with a beautiful tale. So
Oh,
anyway, one of my favorites.
oh, well, thank you so much for sharing that. We really appreciate it. So, James, we really appreciate you being on the show today. And to our listeners, we hope that you go out and check out James's books. And we're really excited for your series. And I guess it's available on Amazon and other booksellers.
I believe it's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and independent booksellers all have
Okay.
the book. Yes, and
Okay. And we'll,
should be audio out too within a month or so as
oh,
well.
great. Great. So we'll definitely be putting those links on our website for our blog and for our podcast. It'll be in the description for the podcast as well for people to be able to purchase that.
Thank you so much.
You're
And
very welcome.
look, the only thing I really hope to leave you and the readers with is
Sure.
there was no point to this book other than one, which is that the reader should just have a great time reading it. Like that's how I
Great.
feel like, when I get a fiction book from Ken Follett or some of my other,
Yeah.
ones that I love, I just want to have a great time reading the
Yeah.
book. And that was
Yeah.
the only goal in my books. So
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And hopefully all the listeners who go out and purchase your book will definitely feel that same. And please, to the listeners who go out and purchase this book, don't forget to leave a review for Mr. Hogg. And we're so excited for your books and wish you much success on the series. And as always, for more information on James's books, you can click the link in the description or go to his website at jamesthogg.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Next week's episode features author Love Lubker on her on her new book, Under His Spell. She's one of our newest signed authors with Historian Press. Thank you to our listeners and the viewers, and this is Dee Marley. Keep making history and keep listening.